Modi calls for peace with Pakistan. Here's what happened. It was the last thing anyone expected. After weeks of deadly border clashes and rising fears of all-out war, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi shocked the world. Standing before the nation, he declared, "Enough blood has been spilled. It's time to give peace a chance." And just like that, a joint ceasefire was announced between India and Pakistan. But how did this happen? Who really brokered the deal? And why are some calling it too little, too late? Because even as the headlines praised a breakthrough, reports of fresh violations started surfacing within hours. And behind the scenes, powerful nations like Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and Iran were quietly pushing both sides to stop the bleeding. Is this the beginning of real peace? Or just another pause before the next round of conflict? Let's break down what just happened, who's really pulling the strings, and what it means for India, Pakistan, and the world. Segment 1. What triggered this breakthrough? The lead up to this ceasefire wasn't just another round of tension. It was a full-blown escalation that nearly tipped into open war. It all began with a devastating attack in Indian-administered Kashmir on April 22nd. A convoy of Indian tourists was ambushed, and India quickly blamed Pakistan-based militants. What followed was a cycle of retaliation. India launched targeted airstrikes on suspected training camps. Pakistan responded with cross-border artillery fire and drones. And within days, dozens were dead. Civilians, soldiers, even children caught in the middle. Entire villages were evacuated, telecom lines were cut. Markets on both sides of the border froze in fear. Then came the tipping point. India announced the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, a decades-old agreement that governs water sharing between the two nations. For Pakistan, already facing water scarcity, this was seen as an act of aggression. With both sides bracing for more strikes, the international community stepped in fast. The situation was too dangerous, too volatile. The world needed a pause, and that's when the first backchannel talks began. Segment 2. The silent mediators, Saudi, Malaysia, and Iran. While the world watched India and Pakistan inch toward disaster, three unlikely players stepped up, quietly but decisively. First, Saudi Arabia, a close partner to both Pakistan and India through energy and trade. Sources reveal that Riyadh privately urged both leaders to avoid total war, warning that any conflict would destabilize the entire energy market, something neither side could afford. Then came Malaysia. As chair of ASEAN in 2025, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim used his influence to open back-channel diplomacy, leveraging Malaysia's neutral credibility to bring both sides into private talks, far away from cameras. And then, surprisingly, Iran. Tehran, often seen as a wild card in South Asian politics, offered to host regional security dialogues aimed at preventing any external manipulation of the conflict by bigger powers. None of these countries made loud public statements, but behind closed doors, they built the diplomatic bridge that made the Modi-Sharif ceasefire possible. And when President Donald Trump publicly announced the ceasefire, it was these silent mediators who had already laid the groundwork. But as history shows, a ceasefire is only as strong as the trust behind it, and trust between India and Pakistan remains in short supply. Segment 3. Modi's national address and ceasefire details. On May 10th, the world watched as Prime Minister Narendra Modi went live on national television. In a rare moment of direct outreach, Modi addressed not just the people of India, but the entire region. "Enough blood has been spilled. It's time to give peace a chance," he declared. Modi called for a new era of stability, emphasizing the shared history, culture, and economic potential between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. Then came the headline announcement: a 72-hour ceasefire, effective immediately along the line of control, backed by a commitment to resume diplomatic dialogue. The ceasefire details included 3 key points: full suspension of cross-border military operations, immediate reactivation of diplomatic hotlines to manage any future incidents, humanitarian access to villages caught in the crossfire. Both nations also agreed to restart cross-border trade, including the restoration of key transport routes that had been closed for weeks. But while Modi's speech struck a tone of hope and unity, critics were quick to point out what was missing. No mention of Kashmir's political status, no mention of terrorism, no mention of the Indus Waters Treaty suspension, and in Pakistan, reactions were mixed. Segment 4. Pakistan's response and BRICS dynamics. While Modi's speech dominated international headlines, Pakistan's reaction was far more cautious. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif addressed the nation shortly after, welcoming the ceasefire but warning, "We have heard words before. What matters now are actions." Sharif stressed that Kashmir remains unresolved. He demanded clarity on India's suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, calling it a threat to Pakistan's very survival. Meanwhile, Pakistan's foreign minister hinted that Islamabad may escalate the issue to BRICS, leveraging its deepening ties with China, Russia, and Brazil, to gain diplomatic backing on the world stage. Analysts say Pakistan sees BRICS as a counterweight to US and Western influence in South Asia. But while Pakistan played the diplomatic card, its military leaders were less optimistic. Defense officials in Islamabad warned that without real movement on Kashmir, the ceasefire was just another pause, not a permanent solution. On the ground, reports of border skirmishes started to trickle in within hours of the ceasefire announcement. The world may have applauded the headlines, but on the ground, nothing felt settled. Segment 5. Economic fallout on both sides. While politicians traded speeches and promises, the real cost of this conflict was already hitting ordinary people. Let's start with the markets. In India, the Bombay Stock Exchange dropped 3% during the height of the military escalation. Sectors like tourism, logistics, and energy took the biggest hit. Investors dumped stocks tied to cross-border trade, fearing a prolonged standoff. In Pakistan, the Pakistan Stock Exchange fell nearly 5%, with the Pakistani rupee sliding against the US dollar to its lowest level in months. And even after the ceasefire was announced, the markets only partially recovered. Investors remain skeptical about whether the peace will hold. Local businesses on both sides suffered massively. Tour operators in Kashmir reported mass cancellations, with the tourism season, a lifeline for the region, effectively shut down. Cross-border traders faced weeks of halted shipments, costing millions in lost revenue for both countries. And then there's the Indus Waters Treaty. India's suspension of the treaty, which regulates the flow of rivers into Pakistan, sparked panic in Pakistani agricultural sectors. Farmers fear water shortages. Pakistan's government is now preparing to challenge India in international courts. Meanwhile, Pakistan's leadership is leaning heavily on BRICS alliances, hoping China, Russia, and other partners will help offset economic losses. But with inflation rising in both countries, currency instability, and foreign investors pulling back, the economic damage is already deep and lasting. And without a clear path forward, the ceasefire risks being too little, too late. Segment 6. Global and regional reactions. The ceasefire didn't just send shockwaves through South Asia. It triggered reactions from around the world, starting with the United States. President Donald Trump was quick to claim credit, calling it a big win for world peace on his official channel. Both sides have shown leadership. The US is ready to help them reach a permanent solution, Trump declared. But not everyone was convinced. In Beijing, Chinese officials praised the ceasefire, but warned that Asia's peace must be led by Asians, subtly pushing back on US involvement. Saudi Arabia publicly praised both nations, but sources say Riyadh remains concerned about how this conflict could destabilize energy markets if it flares up again. Malaysia, through Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, urged both countries to commit to ASEAN-led peace dialogues to prevent further escalations. And Iran issued a rare joint statement with both India and Pakistan, offering to host future regional security summits in Tehran. Meanwhile, the United Nations called for independent observers to monitor the ceasefire along the line of control. But despite the global applause, the ground reality hasn't changed much. Both militaries remain on high alert. Diplomats are treading carefully, and border communities are holding their breath. Segment 7. What's next? Fragile hope or another broken promise? So, what happens next? History tells us that India and Pakistan have been here before. Ceasefires, diplomatic handshakes, and then, somewhere down the line, a return to conflict. This time there's real global pressure. The economic damage is already crippling both nations, and the silent mediators, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Iran, are ready to step in again if talks collapse. But the biggest roadblocks remain. Kashmir's unresolved status, India's suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, ongoing border skirmishes, and mutual distrust. The next 72 hours are critical. Will this fragile peace hold, or is it already falling apart behind the scenes? We'll be watching closely. And if you want to understand the full history of this conflict, watch our deep dive here.